When my son died in a mountain accident, I thought grief was all I had left. My daughter-in-law stayed close every single day, soup every morning, tears that looked real, words that felt like family. I believed her completely. Then a boy appeared at the funeral and pressed an envelope into my hands. "Wait until she's gone," he whispered. Inside was a key and an address. I drove there alone. What I found inside that house destroyed everything. "You are watching Revenge, Dad. I'm profoundly thankful for your presence in our community today. As we step into a father's ultimate quest for justice, I want to connect with you. What part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments now." Note: this presentation incorporates creative fictional adjustments engineered for entertainment. Similarities to real-world names or locations are entirely coincidental, but the underlying core lesson is essential. The second cup of coffee had just finished brewing when the phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my house on Mariposa Avenue in Fresno, the morning paper folded open to the sports section, the smell of dark roast filling the room the way it had every morning for 41 years. Eleanor used to say, "I made coffee strong enough to wake the dead." I used to laugh at that. I did not laugh anymore. It was 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in October, and the sky outside my window was the particular shade of pale gold that only exists in the Central Valley in autumn. I remember that detail with the kind of precision that grief carves into a man. When everything after a certain moment becomes a blur, everything before it becomes unbearably sharp. I picked up the phone on the third ring. "Mr. Crawford." The voice was professional, measured the kind of voice that has been trained to carry weight without cracking under it. "This is Officer Denise Hartley with the California Highway Patrol. I'm calling regarding your son, Liam Crawford." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. Liam had driven up to Tahoe City that Friday with a colleague for a long weekend. He had called me Thursday night, voice easy and relaxed, telling me he would bring back smoked trout from a place near the marina that I had mentioned once years ago, and apparently never forgotten to bring up. That was Liam. He remembered the small things. "There's been an incident on Interstate 80 near Donner Pass," Officer Hartley continued. "Early this morning, in the pre-dawn hours, road conditions were severely compromised due to overnight ice accumulation." I set the mug down. My hand was steady. I did not yet understand that the steadiness was the last of it. "Your son's vehicle left the roadway on a descending curve at approximately 2:47 in the morning. Mr. Crawford, I am deeply sorry to inform you that your son did not survive." The words entered my ears and then seemed to travel somewhere else entirely, bypassing comprehension, going straight to the body. My chest seized, my vision tunneled. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen table and felt the grain of the wood beneath my fingers and thought with absolute absurdity that Eleanor had picked out this table at an estate sale in 1987 and refinished it herself over 3 weekends in the garage. "Mr. Crawford, are you still with me, sir?" "Oh, tao, la." "Yes," I said. My voice came out of someone else's throat. "I'm here." The details that followed arrived in fragments I could not assemble into anything coherent. Single vehicle, no other cars involved. The descent on the eastbound approach to Donner Summit. Ice, a guardrail, the drop below. I do not remember ending the call. I remember standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard, the old lemon tree Eleanor planted the year Liam started kindergarten, the patio chairs I kept. Meaning to repaint the garden hose I had left coiled on the grass since September. Everything exactly as it had been at 7:14. Everything completely destroyed. Pastor Bill Hennessy from Riverside Community Church, who had officiated Eleanor's funeral 9 years ago, and now sat across from me at my own kitchen table, speaking words about the Lord's plan that I heard without receiving. I let them come because I did not know how to ask them to leave. The service was held 5 days later at Riverside Community Church, a small gathering of colleagues from Liam's engineering firm, a few friends from his graduate school years at Cal Poly, and the hollow silence of a room that should have held more people. Liam had been a private man, brilliant with systems and structures, quieter with people. He had Eleanor's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that appeared rarely and meant everything when it did. Chloe sat beside me in the front pew, her hand wrapped around mine, her shoulders trembling through the entire service. She was 29 years old and had been married to my son for 4 years, and she wept with the kind of abandon that made the women in the row behind us reach for their tissues. Afterward, in the church parking lot, she turned to me with red-rimmed eyes and pressed her forehead against my shoulder. "I can't do this without him, Dad," she whispered. "I don't know how." I put my arm around her because she was my son's wife, and she was grieving, and I was 67 years old and had buried a wife and now a child, and I understood with the authority of experience that there was nothing to say. "You don't have to figure that out today," I told her. She pulled back and looked at me with something fierce and broken in her expression. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm going to take care of you the way Liam would have wanted. You're my family, the only family I have left." I thanked her. I meant it. The last of the mourners had drifted toward their cars when I noticed the boy standing near the far edge of the parking lot, half hidden by the shadow of a large sycamore. He was perhaps 11 or 12, slight with dark hair, and the cautious posture of a child who has been told to wait and has been waiting for a long time. I had seen him before. He lived 2 houses down from Liam and Chloe's place in the Woodward Park neighborhood, always shooting hoops alone in the driveway in the early evenings when I visited. Toby, that was his name, Toby Marsh. He watched me cross the parking lot toward him with an expression of such concentrated seriousness that it stopped me mid-step. "Mr. Crawford." His voice was barely above a whisper. He was holding a plain white envelope in both hands, pressing it against his chest, like something he had been protecting for days. "Liam gave me this a few weeks ago. He said I had to wait until everyone left. He said I had to make sure nobody saw me give it to you." He glanced toward the parking lot, toward Chloe's dark coat, disappearing into the passenger seat of a neighbor's car. Then he held the envelope out with both hands. "He said it was really important, sir. He made me promise." I looked down at the envelope. On the front in my son's careful, even handwriting were 2 words: "For Dad." The envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. I stood in the shadow of the sycamore tree until Toby disappeared around the corner, at the end of the block, his sneakers scuffing against the sidewalk, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Then I looked down at what my son had left for me. The handwriting was unmistakably Liam's, that careful architectural print he had developed in engineering school, each letter placed with the same deliberate precision he brought to everything he built. 2 words on the front. Nothing else. I did not open it in the parking lot. Something in the way Toby had glanced toward Chloe's coat disappearing into that car told me this was not meant to be opened in public. I slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of my suit jacket, pressed my hand flat against my chest for a moment, and walked back to where Pastor Hennessy was waiting to drive me home. The house on Mariposa Avenue had never felt so large as it did that evening. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, and a glass of water I did not drink, and the tick of the wall clock that Eleanor had bought at a craft fair in Clovis 20 years ago. I had kept that clock running through 9 years of living alone. Some habits are just ways of keeping someone close. I opened the envelope slowly, the way you open something you are not sure you want to see. Inside were 2 items. A small brass key on a plain ring, the kind of key that opens a deadbolt rather than a padlock, solid old-fashioned, heavier than it looked, and a folded piece of paper, handwritten 2 pages front and back in Liam's careful print. "Dad, if Toby found you, then you're reading this after the service, and I'm glad. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it alone. Don't tell Chloe. I know that sounds strange. I know you trust her. But please, Dad, just this once, trust me more. There is a house. I bought it 14 months ago, and I have been getting it ready ever since. The address is at the bottom of this letter. It's in Lake Tahoe up in the mountains, about a 4-hour drive from Fresno. The key in this envelope opens the front door. I bought it for you, Dad, for your retirement. Mom always said you needed somewhere quiet and beautiful to write that book you've been carrying around in your head since before I was born. She used to tell me, your father has a whole world inside him, Liam. He just needs the right place to let it out. I never forgot that. Inside the house, in the master bedroom closet behind the back panel, there is a safe built into the wall. The combination is Mom's birthday. You know the one. Go alone, Dad. Don't tell anyone where you're going. What's in that safe is for you and no one else. I love you more than I ever found the right words to say. Liam. I read the letter 3 times. The 3rd time my hands were shaking badly enough that the paper trembled in the kitchen light, and I had to set it flat on the table and press both palms against it to read the address he had written at the bottom. A house. My son had bought me a house and never said a single word about it. I thought about the last 18 months, the times Liam had seemed distracted on the phone, the holiday dinner at Christmas where he had been quieter than usual, the fishing trip we had planned for August that he had postponed twice without real explanation. I had chalked it all up to the pressures of his work, the demands of a young marriage, the ordinary drift that happens between fathers and adult sons when both are too proud to say they miss each other. I had told myself there would be more time. The clock on the wall ticked on. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope with the key. Then I went to the window and looked out at the street, at the yellow wash of the streetlights on the pavement, at the ordinary Tuesday evening, proceeding without any awareness of what had just broken open in my kitchen. Chloe called at 9:30. Her voice was soft and exhausted, worn down to its quietest register. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, Dad. I was thinking maybe I could come over tomorrow morning, make breakfast. I don't want you to be alone in that house." "I appreciate that, sweetheart," I said, "but I think I need a day or two to myself. I might take a drive, clear my head a little." A pause. "Of course. That makes sense." Another pause, slightly longer. "Where are you thinking of going?" The question was gentle conversational, the kind a caring daughter-in-law would naturally ask. There was nothing in it that should have made the back of my neck prickle the way it did. I could not have explained the feeling if I had tried. "Just up toward the foothills," I said. "No destination. You know how I am?" "I do," she said. "Liam always said you did your best thinking behind the wheel." Her voice caught on his name, a small, authentic fracture. "Call me if you need anything. Okay, I mean it. Any time." "I will," I told her. "Good night, Chloe." I set the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, one hand resting on the counter, the brass key pressing a small, cold circle against my chest, through the fabric of my shirt, where I had already tucked it back into my pocket. My son had told me not to tell her. Liam had never in 34 years asked me to keep a secret from anyone in the family. He was not a man who operated in shadows. He believed in directness, in saying the hard thing plainly, rather than letting it fester. Whatever he had put in that safe in Lake Tahoe was something he had decided with full deliberation that Chloe must not know about. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and did not sleep. At 4 in the morning, I got up, made a thermos of coffee, changed into clothes comfortable enough for a long drive, and wrote a note I left on the kitchen counter in case anyone came by. Out for a drive, back by evening. Then I picked up my car keys, checked that the brass key and the letter were still in my jacket pocket, and walked out into the dark, cold 5 o'clock air of a Central Valley October morning. The freeway was nearly empty heading north. The valley floor stretched flat and dark on either side of Interstate 99, the almond orchards and grape fields invisible in the pre-dawn blackness. By the time I reached Sacramento and turned east onto Interstate 80, the sky ahead of me had begun to lighten at the edges, a thin gray seam opening along the crest of the Sierra Nevada. I watched the mountains grow larger through the windshield, and I felt something I could not name pressing behind my sternum. Not grief exactly, not fear, something older and more fundamental, the feeling of moving towards something that cannot be undone, of crossing a line that exists only in the moment of crossing it. The sign appeared in my headlights, green letters on dark aluminum. Donner Pass, 14 miles. My hands tightened on the wheel. I kept driving. The sun was fully up by the time I came down off the summit, and the lake appeared. I had driven this stretch of highway before decades ago, on a family trip, when Liam was 7 and Eleanor had packed sandwiches in a red cooler and made us stop at every scenic overlook between Sacramento and the Nevada state line, because she believed with a conviction I never once managed to argue against that you could not truly experience a place by passing through it at 65 miles an hour. That was Eleanor. She had a gift for insisting on the present moment, for planting her feet in it and refusing to be hurried. Lake Tahoe in October is a different thing from Lake Tahoe in summer. The tourist traffic has thinned, the light comes at a lower angle and turns the water a deep, serious blue that has nothing to do with leisure or vacation. It is the blue of something ancient and indifferent to human concerns, and standing at its edge, you feel appropriately small. I felt that smallness now cresting the final curve on Highway 89, and seeing the lake spread out below me in the early morning stillness, and for the first time since Tuesday, I felt something other than grief. I felt the precise, wordless ache of beauty entering a broken place. The address Liam had written led me off the main highway onto a 2-lane road that climbed gently through a corridor of ponderosa pines, There barked the color of cinnamon in the morning light. The houses here were set back from the road, each one given enough space and privacy to suggest that whoever had built them understood something important about solitude. I followed the GPS through 2 turns, and then the road curved and I saw it. I pulled over immediately. I could not have continued driving if I had wanted to. The house sat on a slight rise above the road, framed on 3 sides by pines and on the 4th by a view that opened westward across the lake toward the mountains beyond. It was a single-story structure built of timber and stone with a wide covered porch running the length of the front large windows that caught the morning light and held it, and a metal roof the color of weathered iron. It was not ostentatious. It was not trying to impress. It had the particular beauty of something built to last, rather than to be admired, and sitting there in my car with the engine idling and my hands slack on the wheel, I felt the back of my throat tighten with a grief so specific and so enormous that I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep it contained. My son had built me a home. I sat in the car for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to counting the seconds, the way you count the seconds between a lightning strike and the thunder measuring the distance between what you understand and what you can bear. Then I got out of the car. The front door opened on the first try, the brass key turning smoothly in the deadbolt with the ease of a lock that has been installed recently and maintained carefully. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of cedar and something else linseed oil, perhaps the smell of new wood properly finished. I stepped into the entry and stopped. The living room opened ahead of me, anchored by a stone fireplace that ran floor to ceiling on the far wall, with a hearth wide enough to take 4-foot logs. The furniture was simple and well made, a leather sofa the color of saddle brown, 2 reading chairs positioned to face both the fire and the windows, a low oak coffee table with a grain so pronounced it looked like topography. On the mantelpiece, centered between 2 unlit candles, was a framed photograph I recognized immediately. The 3 of us. Christmas morning, 2 years ago. Liam standing between Eleanor's empty chair. We always set a place for her at Christmas. It was our tradition. It was non-negotiable. And me, his arm around my shoulders, his head tilted toward mine. Both of us caught mid-laugh at something I could no longer remember. Chloe had taken the photograph. She had handed back the camera, saying the lighting wasn't right, and then Liam had pulled me into the frame again and told her to try once more, and that second attempt was this unposed, unguarded, the 2 of us exactly as we were. My legs stopped working. I sat down on the hearth with no memory of deciding to sit, and I pressed both hands over my face, and I wept in a way I had not wept since the morning Eleanor passed, ugly and uncontrolled and utterly without dignity, the kind of grief that does not care what it looks like, because it has moved past caring about anything except the raw fact of loss. I do not know how long I sat there, long enough that the light through the windows shifted and the room warmed around me, long enough that I ran out of tears and arrived at the dry, scoured place that exists on the other side of them. When I finally stood and wiped my face with my handkerchief, I walked slowly through the rest of the house. The kitchen was laid out the way a person who has watched someone else cook for 30 years would lay out a kitchen, the counter space generous, the lighting practical, the window above the sink, positioned to look out at the pines rather than at the road. In the pantry, I found canned goods still within their use. By dates, a bag of dark roast coffee beans from a roaster in Truckee and a handwritten card taped to the inside of the door that said simply, "Start here, Dad." I pressed my hand against that card and held it there for a moment. The home office was at the end of the hall, and when I pushed open the door, I had to grip the door frame. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls empty, but for a set of unabridged dictionaries and a worn copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden that I had given Liam for his 16th birthday, and apparently never gotten back. In the corner stood a proper writing desk, not a computer desk, not an office desk, but a writing desk, solid oak with a leather surface and 2 drawers and a lamp positioned exactly right. The chair behind it was the kind of chair you could sit in for hours. The window in front of the desk looked west out across the lake. Eleanor had told Liam clearly precisely what his father needed. I stood in that office for a long time, with my hand on the back of the writing chair looking out at the water. Then I walked to the master bedroom. On the pillow, placed with the deliberateness of someone who has thought carefully about the moment it will be found, was a plain white envelope, smaller than the one Toby had given me. No name on the front, just a single word written in Liam's careful hand. Dad. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. There's a safe behind the back panel of the closet. Mom's birthday. Everything inside is for you. But Dad, before you open it, I need you to know that I love you. Whatever you find in there, whatever you feel when you read what I've left, you hold on to that first. Hold on to the love. The rest will make sense. I promise. I stood up. I walked to the walk-in closet and ran my fingers along the back wall until I felt the seam, a hairline gap in the cedar paneling invisible, unless you were looking for it. I pressed along the right edge, and the panel swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing the gray steel face of a wall, safe 8 inches square, with a digital keypad. Eleanor Rose Crawford, born March the 17th, 1952, 031752. The keypad beeped once, a green light blinked, and the safe clicked open. The safe was not large, 8 inches wide, perhaps 10 inches tall, set flush into the wall behind the cedar panel, with the kind of careful workmanship that suggested Liam had not done this himself, but had hired someone who understood the value of things being done right. Inside, arranged with a neatness that was entirely my son's, were 4 items. A USB drive, black and unremarkable, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at any drugstore in America. It had a strip of white masking tape along one side, and on the tape in Liam's print, 2 words, "Watch first." Beneath it, 2 manila folders thick with documents held together with binder clips. The first was labeled Legal and Financial Dad in blue ink. The second had no label. Its cover was blank except for a single red line drawn diagonally across it with a felt tip marker, not a label, not a title, just a line, the kind of mark you make when you want something to be found in a specific order and not before. And beneath the folders at the very bottom of the safe, a small digital voice recorder the size of a pack of chewing gum with a yellow sticky note attached, "Play this after the USB, not before." I stood in the closet doorway holding all 4 items against my chest, and I had the sudden irrational sensation that I was holding the actual weight of my son's last months, that everything he had carried alone, every decision he had made in private, every night he had sat somewhere without me knowing and built this careful architecture of truth, had been compressed into these objects and was pressing against my ribs now with a force that had nothing to do with their physical mass. I carried everything to the writing desk in the home office. I sat in the leather chair, Liam's chair, the chair he had chosen for me, and I set each item on the desk in the order I had found them. The USB on the left, the 2 folders in the center, the recorder on the right. Then I opened the desk drawer and found without surprise a laptop computer, fully charged, a sticky note on the lid. "Already set up, Dad. Just open it." I almost smiled. Almost. The laptop opened to a plain desktop with a single folder icon in the center of the screen. The folder was named For Arthur Crawford Read in order. Inside were 3 files. The first was labeled Video, Watch This First. The second was labeled Documents Open After Video. The third was labeled Garage File Open Last. I plugged in the USB drive. The video file opened automatically, filling the screen, and then my son's face was looking at me from across whatever distance exists between the living and the dead. And I pressed both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward, and I did not breathe. Liam was sitting at this desk, in this chair, in this room. The lake was visible through the window behind him, gray-blue, and still the mountains beyond it dusted with early snow. He was wearing a dark green flannel shirt. I recognized I had given it to him for his birthday 3 years ago, and he had worn it so often the elbows had gone soft. He looked thinner than I remembered. His cheekbones were more pronounced, the skin beneath his eyes carrying a shadow that I had noticed at Christmas and attributed to overwork. His hair was shorter than usual, but his eyes were steady and his hands folded on the desk in front of him were still. He looked directly into the camera. "Dad," he said. One word. My name in his mouth? And the grief that I thought I had emptied out of myself on the hearth an hour ago came roaring back with a force that bent me forward over the desk, one hand gripping the edge, knuckles whitening jaw clenched against a sound I refused to make in that empty room. "If you're watching this," Liam continued, his voice carrying that particular quality. It had always had calm on the surface, precise, but with something underneath it that you had to know him to hear. "Then you found the house. You found Toby. You did everything exactly right, and I knew you would because you always do." He paused. He unfolded his hands and placed them on his knees, and I saw his shoulders settle, the physical preparation of someone who is about to say something that costs him. "I need to tell you some things, Dad. Some of them are going to be hard to hear. I need you to stay with me through all of it because the order matters. Everything I'm going to tell you connects to everything else, and if you walk away in the middle, you won't have the full picture. And you need the full picture. You need it to protect yourself. I straightened in the chair. The word protect landed differently than the rest. I'm going to start with the house, he said, because I want you to understand it before I tell you anything else. I want you to know what this place is before I tell you what it's surrounded by. His mouth moved into something that was almost a smile, not quite, but close enough to make my chest ache with the specific pain of recognizing a beloved expression rendered in a screen rather than a face. Mom used to tell me you had a whole world inside you, Dad. She said it every time she caught you staring out a window somewhere, with that look on your face, you know the one. She called it your going away look. She said, your father goes somewhere when he looks like that Liam, somewhere real, somewhere that's all his. He just hasn't found the door yet. My vision blurred. I pressed the heel of my hand against my left eye and kept the right one on the screen. So I built you a door, Liam said simply. That's all this is, Dad. Everything else I'm going to tell you, hold on to that. Hold on to the door. He took a slow breath. His hands tightened slightly on his knees. Now, he said, there's something I have to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago and didn't, because I was trying to protect you. And I need you to forgive me for that before I explain why. His eyes, steady and direct, looked out from the screen and found mine across the impossible distance between us. Dad, he said, I'm sick. The word hit me the way a car accident hits you, not all at once, but in layers, each one arriving a fraction of a second after the last, until the full weight of it comes down, and there is nothing left to brace against. I pushed back from the desk. The chair rolled 2 inches on the hardwood floor, and I stood up without deciding to stand, one hand gripping the desk edge, the other pressed flat against my sternum, as if I could hold whatever was happening inside my chest, in place by sheer physical force. The room felt smaller than it had 30 seconds ago. The lake through the window looked impossibly far away. On the screen, Liam waited. He had recorded this knowing I would need a moment. He had thought of everything. I sat back down. I pressed my fist against my mouth. I nodded at the screen, which was a ridiculous thing to do, nodding at a recording of a man who was already gone, but I did it anyway because it was the only way I knew to tell him I was still with him. Brain tumor, Liam said. Glioblastoma multiforme stage 4. I was diagnosed 6 months before I made this video. The oncologist at UC Davis Medical Center gave me 4 to 6 months from the date of diagnosis. By the time you're watching this, Dad, that window has either closed or is very close to closing. Glioblastoma. I knew that word. I had looked it up once years ago after reading a magazine article about a senator who had died from it. The most aggressive form of primary brain tumor. Average survival after diagnosis, 12 to 15 months with treatment. 4 to 6 without. The kind of diagnosis that reorders everything immediately and permanently. I want to explain why I didn't tell you. Liam continued, leaning forward slightly, his forearms coming to rest on the desk. And I need you to actually hear the reason, Dad, not just the words. Because you're going to be angry, and you have every right to be. And I'm asking you to hold that anger long enough to understand what I was thinking. I was not angry. I was something that had no name, yet a grief so layered and so specific that anger hadn't found its way to the surface. It was there somewhere below, I could feel it, but above it was something rawer and more immediate. You sat with Mom for 11 months, Liam said quietly. You drove her to UC Davis every 3 weeks for treatment. You held her hand through every scan, every result, every conversation, where the doctors found new ways to tell us the same thing was still true. You did all of that, Dad, without falling apart, without missing a single appointment, without letting her see you break. I watched you do it. His voice dropped. I watched what it cost you. Eleanor, 3 years of remission after the first diagnosis, then the return swift and decisive, and 11 months of fighting it on her terms. Her terms, she had been very clear about that. I had driven that stretch of I-80 between Fresno and Sacramento more times than I could count. The pre-dawn highway, empty Eleanor asleep in the passenger seat with a blanket pulled up to her chin, and I had talked to God in the dark about things I had never said aloud to any living person. Liam had been there for all of it. 25 years old and watching his mother fade and his father hold together by force of will, and he had learned from it in ways I was only beginning to understand. I could not put you through that again, he said. I made that decision the day I got the diagnosis, and I held to it. What I wanted, what I chose, was for the time we had left to be about living, not about watching me the way we watched Mom, not about the look in your eyes at the end of every hospital visit. I wanted one more Christmas where you laughed, one more fishing trip where we sat on the water and talked about nothing important, one more phone call where you told me about the neighbors and I pretended to remember who they were. My jaw was shaking. I clenched it and breathed through my nose and kept my eyes on the screen. I used the time I had to take care of you instead, Liam said. I liquidated my stock portfolio, about $300,000 that I had been building for 8 years. I cashed out my retirement accounts, which was a penalty hit I didn't care about. I took a second mortgage on the house. He paused. The total came to just under $1.2 million for the property here. He said it plainly, the way he explained everything clearly without drama, as if the logistical clarity were itself a form of love. And it was. It absolutely was. There is additional money, Dad, beyond the house. Accounts you don't know about yet, set up in your name, insulated from anyone else's access. Richard has the full accounting. You will not have to worry about money, ever. That's not a comfort, I know. Money isn't the thing you need right now. But it's the one concrete thing I could guarantee you, so I guaranteed it. I looked around the office, the empty bookshelves waiting to be filled, the writing desk chosen with such care, the window and the lake beyond it, the mountains, the light. My son had spent the last months of his life building this for me, not raging at the diagnosis, not grieving what he was losing, but sitting down and working out with the same methodical precision he brought to every engineering problem exactly what his father would need when he was gone. I'm sorry I kept this from you, Liam said. I'm sorry you're sitting there right now carrying this alone. But Dad, I need you to stay with this video, because the house and the money, those aren't the real reason I made this recording. He looked directly into the camera. His jaw tightened slightly, almost imperceptibly, the way it always did when something difficult was coming. There's something else, he said. Something I discovered about Chloe. Before I reveal the dark evidence my son uncovered regarding his wife Chloe, write "still here" in the comments right now, so I know you're locked into this mystery with me. Please note, the following events incorporate dramatic adjustments engineered for entertainment. If you are uncomfortable with these dark themes, you may want to step away now. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. I had been holding myself together through the cancer revelation by concentrating on Liam's face, on the steadiness of his voice, on the familiar architecture of his expressions. That concentration had been the only thing keeping me functional. But the moment he said Chloe's name in that particular tone, not the tone of a husband mentioning his wife, but the tone of a man who has spent weeks choosing his words carefully, something shifted in my chest that I did not have a name for yet. I need to back up about 2 months, Liam said on the screen, to give you the full picture. He reached off camera and brought back a glass of water, took a sip, set it down. His hands, I noticed, were completely steady. Mine were not. I pressed them flat on the desk and leaned in. About 8 weeks before I made this video, I started noticing things, he said. Small things at first. Chloe coming home later than her schedule explained. A change in her phone habits, screen down on the table bathroom, to take calls, the kind of adjustments people make when they're managing a second conversation. I told myself I was imagining it. The tumor was affecting my sleep, my mood. I thought maybe I was reading things into ordinary behavior because I was sick and scared and looking for something to be angry about. I thought about the family dinners over the past year, Chloe passing the breadbasket, laughing at something on television, squeezing Liam's hand across the table. The performance of a loving wife rendered in precise, careful detail. But it kept happening, Liam continued. So 6 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator. Her name is Carol Stevens, based in Sacramento. She came highly recommended. She's been doing this work for 19 years, and she is extremely good at it. He paused. Within 10 days, she had everything. He reached off camera again, and this time produced a photograph, holding it up toward the camera. Even on the laptop screen, the image was clear enough. A restaurant upscale, the kind with linen tablecloths and low lighting. Chloe sitting across from a man I did not recognize, leaning forward with her elbows on the table, her hand resting over his. The body language was not ambiguous. It was not the posture of colleagues or friends. It was the posture of two people who have stopped being careful. My stomach turned over slowly like a stone rolling in deep water. His name is Vance Ridley, Liam said, setting the photograph down. He's 43 years old. He has been in the insurance industry for 15 years, most recently as a senior broker at Pacific Coast Financial in Sacramento. He is good at his job, Dad. He understands policy structures, underwriting processes, and more importantly, he understands the specific conditions under which claims get paid without triggering a detailed investigation. He let that sentence sit for a moment. The affair has been going on for approximately 8 months. 8 months. I ran backward through 8 months of Sundays of holiday meals of the birthday dinner in July, where Chloe had made reservations at my favorite steakhouse in Fresno, and sat across from me asking about my garden and telling me how much Liam talked about me at home. 8 months of that woman sitting at my table. I know what you're feeling right now, Dad, Liam said, and his voice had the careful, measured quality of someone walking across ice. I felt it too, but I need you to hold on to it because what I'm about to tell you is worse. Worse. The word registered like a door closing somewhere far inside the house. Carol's investigation turned up something beyond the affair, he continued. Financial records, correspondence, a pattern of activity between Chloe and Vance that began approximately 6 weeks after the affair started. He folded his hands on the desk. They have been meeting regularly at a property Vance owns in Elk Grove. Carol documented 14 separate visits over a 6-week period. During that same period, Vance made 3 separate inquiries to different insurance carriers, not about his client's policies, Dad, about mine. The room felt cold. I reached up and pressed 2 fingers against my jaw hard, the way you press on a bruise to confirm it's real. I want you to open the manila folder now, Liam said. Not the red one, the first one, legal and financial. There's a subfolder inside marked Carol Stevens Surveillance Report. Open it to the 3rd page. I pulled the folder from the desk and opened it. The surveillance report was thorough dated entries, time-stamped photographs, vehicle license plates. On the 3rd page beneath a photograph of Vance Ridley entering a glass-fronted office building in downtown Sacramento. Carol Stevens had written a single-paragraph summary. I read it twice. Then I set the folder down and looked at the screen. She documented contact with 3 separate insurance carriers, Liam said quietly. Inquiries about policy structures for a married 34-year-old male in good health, or what appeared to be good health. The corner of his mouth moved just barely. The irony of that particular detail is not lost on me. I could not speak. There was no one to speak to, but my throat tightened around something that was working its way up from a very deep place. I confronted Chloe about the affair 3 weeks ago, Liam continued. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, and I told her what Carol had found. She cried, Dad. She cried the way she cries at everything, completely convincingly with her whole body. She said she was sorry. She said she had been terrified about my diagnosis, that she had felt alone, that Vance had been a mistake she couldn't undo. She begged me not to tell you, said it would destroy the family. He looked directly into the camera. She never mentioned the insurance inquiries, not once. Not a word about Vance's professional interest in my policy coverage. She sat there for 2 hours apologizing for the affair, and she never once let the other thing enter the room. He let the silence hold for exactly 3 seconds. That's when I understood, Dad. That's when I knew this wasn't a woman who had made a terrible mistake. That's when I knew what I was actually dealing with. His jaw set. His eyes stayed level and direct. Open the red folder. The red folder was thinner than the first one. That surprised me. I had expected bulk, the weight of serious wrongdoing spread across many pages. Instead, it was perhaps 30 sheets held together with a single binder clip, and it was the precise economical thinness of it that frightened me most. Whoever had assembled this had not needed much paper to say what needed to be said. I set it on the desk and opened it. The first page was a cover sheet in Carol Stevens' handwriting, a summary paragraph dated 6 weeks prior, brief and clinical, in the way that investigative reports are brief and clinical, stripping the facts down to their functional core, so that nothing gets in the way of what they mean. I read it, once understood approximately half of it, and looked back at the screen. I'm going to walk you through what you're looking at, Liam said, as if he had anticipated exactly this. Page 2. 3 separate insurance applications, all submitted within a 30-day window, all bearing what appears to be my signature. I turned to page 2. The documents were copies, clean, high-resolution, and scans of official policy applications from 3 different carriers. Pacific Shield Life Insurance, Western Valley Mutual, Cornerstone Financial Group. Each application was 4 pages long. Each bore on the final page a signature line on which the name Liam R. Crawford appeared in blue ink, accompanied by a date and a witness signature I did not recognize. I looked at the signatures for a long time. I had seen Liam's signature on birthday cards, on the closing documents for his first apartment, on the Christmas check he sent me every year, even after I told him to stop. I knew his signature the way you know the handwriting of someone you love, not analytically, not by comparing letter forms, but in the way your body recognizes something before your mind has caught up. These signatures were close. They were very close. But the loop on the L was wrong, and the R had a quality of hesitation in it, a slight thickening of the pen stroke that happens when someone is copying rather than writing from muscle memory. They were not his. The total coverage across the 3 policies is $1 million, Liam said. Policy 1 from Pacific Shield is for $500,000. Chloe is listed as primary beneficiary. Policy 2, Western Valley Mutual, is for $300,000, with Vance Ridley listed as beneficiary under the designation of business partner, a designation that has no basis in reality since he and I have never had any professional relationship. Policy 3, Cornerstone Financial, is for $200,000 payable to an entity called Sierra Peak Investment Trust, with Vance Ridley listed as trustee. I turned through the pages, slowly reading each policy summary. $1 million. The number was not abstract. It had the weight of a specific plan behind it, the kind of plan that required research and patience and a working knowledge of how insurance claims get processed and paid. Vance knew exactly what he was doing. Liam continued. Splitting the coverage across 3 separate carriers reduces the likelihood of any single company flagging the applications for cross-referencing. Using different beneficiary designations, spouse business, partner trust, creates the appearance of legitimate estate planning rather than a coordinated scheme. He structured this the way someone structures it when they expect the death to look like an accident and the claims to be processed without complication. I set the folder down and pressed my hands against my face, breathing through my palms, feeling the heat of my own skin against my eyes. In 41 years of marriage and 34 years of fatherhood and 67 years of living, I had never sat in a room and understood with this particular clarity that someone had looked at my child and seen a financial instrument. I want you to look at the witness signatures on each policy, Liam said. Bottom right corner of the last page, same name on all 3, Angela Marsh. I picked the folder back up and checked. He was right. All 3 policies had been witnessed by the same person, the signature consistent across all 3 documents, the consistency of someone signing their own name, rather than copying someone else's. Carol ran Angela Marsh through her databases, Liam said. There is no Angela Marsh licensed as a notary public or insurance witness in the state of California. The name does not appear in any professional registry. Carol's best assessment is that it's a fabricated identity, a name Vance or Chloe, created specifically for these documents and used once. I thought about Vance Ridley, 15 years in the insurance industry, sitting somewhere with a pen and a stack of forms, and my son's name practicing the signature until it was close enough to pass a cursory review. I thought about Chloe at my kitchen table 8 months ago, telling me how much Liam talked about me, asking about my garden with those wide, attentive eyes. My hands were not shaking anymore. The shaking had stopped and been replaced by something colder and more deliberate, the particular stillness that arrives when grief finishes its first pass, and something harder begins to take its place. I reported the forgeries to all 3 carriers before I made this video, Liam said. I contacted their fraud investigation units directly and provided Carol's documentation. Under California Insurance Code, Section 1814, submitting a fraudulent insurance application is a felony, and the FBI has jurisdiction when the fraud involves multiple carriers operating across state lines. The policies have been flagged. They cannot be paid out without triggering a federal investigation. He paused. His eyes dropped to the desk for just a moment, then came back up. But there's something else in that folder, Dad. Behind the insurance documents, a photograph Carol took outside a property in Elk Grove 11 days before I made this recording. I turned to the back of the folder. The photograph was printed on plain copy paper, slightly grainy, taken from across a street. It showed Chloe and Vance standing beside a car in a driveway, their heads close together. Chloe was holding what appeared to be a phone, showing Vance the screen. Vance had one hand on the roof of the car and was nodding. Neither of them was smiling. It was the absence of the smile that told me everything. People having an affair smile. People who are also planning something smile the way people do when they share a secret, a private brightness, a warmth that has an edge of exclusion in it. These two were not smiling because what they were discussing was not a secret that gave them pleasure. It was logistics. 2 weeks after Carol took that photograph, Liam said quietly, "I left a recording device on the kitchen counter during a conversation I knew Chloe was going to have." He looked at the camera. "You need to hear what's on that device, Dad. But not yet. First, I need to tell you what I decided to do. I want to tell you why I didn't go to the police." Liam said it before I had finished processing the last thing he'd told me, as if he knew exactly where my mind would go next and wanted to get there first. I had been thinking precisely that, had been sitting with the question forming itself into something hard and insistent at the back of my throat. Why didn't you go to the police, Liam? Why didn't you pick up a phone and hand this to someone whose job it is to handle it? The honest answer, he said, is that I thought about it. Seriously, for about 2 days after Carol gave me the full report. I sat with it. I wrote out what I had. He ticked the items off on his fingers. Surveillance photographs of an extramarital relationship. Financial records showing Vance made inquiries to insurance carriers about a policy profile matching mine. 3 fraudulent applications bearing a forged version of my signature submitted under a fabricated witness identity. He lowered his hand. "Dad, here's what that adds up to in a criminal investigation. Not enough." I pressed my back against the chair and listened. Insurance fraud requires proof of intent to deceive, not just the fraudulent documents themselves, he continued. The applications were submitted, yes, but no claim had been filed. No money had changed hands. A good defense attorney argues that the policies were exploratory, that the signature was a clerical error, that the witness designation was an administrative oversight. Without a recorded statement of intent, without documented planning, the DA looks at this and sees a complicated civil matter, not a criminal one. He folded his hands. Carol told me the same thing when I asked her directly. She has worked with law enforcement for 19 years. She said, and I'm quoting her exactly, "What you have is suggestive. What you need is definitive." The logic was airtight, and it made me furious in the way that airtight logic sometimes does not, because it was wrong, but because it was right, and being right did not make the situation any less impossible. "So I made a different decision," Liam said. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. I had somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months left. According to the oncologist's most recent assessment, at the time I made this recording, the tumor was moving faster than the initial projections. I was having headaches every morning, losing peripheral vision on the left side, running out of time in ways I could measure. He said all of this without self-pity, the way you state the weather or the distance between 2 points on a map. If I was going to die anyway, and I was Dad, that part was settled. Then the question wasn't whether I would survive this. The question was what I could do with the time I had left that would matter. He looked directly into the camera, and I saw in his face the same expression I had seen when he was 9 years old and had decided against my advice to rebuild the engine of a go-kart he'd bought at a yard sale with his birthday money. The expression of someone who has assessed a situation, identified the path forward, and committed to it completely. "I decided to give them exactly what they were waiting for," he said. I stopped looking tired in front of Chloe and started looking worse, slower, more confused. I complained about headaches in a way I hadn't before. I let her see the tumor progressing, or what she believed was the tumor progressing, because I needed her and Vance to feel that the timeline was moving in their favor. He paused. "And I set up the cameras." 2 cameras, he continued. One mounted behind the air vent on the east wall of the garage. It covers the full interior, both vehicle bays, the workbench, the door to the house. I purchased it through a third-party electronics retailer, using a prepaid card, so there's no purchase record attached to my name. The second camera is integrated into the dashboard of the car itself, embedded behind the instrument panel, in a way that is not visible from the driver's seat or the passenger seat. He leaned forward slightly. Both cameras upload continuously to a private cloud account. The login credentials are in the legal and financial folder, page 11. The footage is time-stamped and cannot be altered without generating a log entry that shows the alteration. It is in every sense that matters legally unimpeachable. My throat was tight. I was beginning to understand the full scope of what my son had done, and understanding it did not make it easier. It made it heavier the way all enormous things become heavier the more clearly you see them. I asked Toby to hold the key for a reason, Liam said. Chloe installed a monitoring application on the wireless network in our house 3 weeks before the trip. Everything that connects to the network, phones, laptops, smart devices she can see. I found it because I have spent my career building systems, and I know what an unauthorized monitoring application looks like in a network traffic log. I didn't remove it because I didn't want her to know I'd found it. His jaw tightened briefly. Toby doesn't have a smartphone. He lives 2 houses down, and his mother keeps him off the network. He is the one person in my immediate world who exists completely outside Chloe's surveillance. I thought of the boy in the parking lot, 11 years old, holding that envelope against his chest with both hands, like it was something breakable. Liam had trusted him with the most important errand of his life, and Toby Marsh had walked up to a grieving old man at a funeral and done his job perfectly. There's one more thing I need to tell you before you look at the garage footage, Liam said. Something that happened the night before I left for Tahoe City. His voice dropped a register. Not lower in volume, lower in quality, the way a sound changes when it moves from open air into a smaller, more enclosed space. I was awake at midnight. I couldn't sleep, the headaches had been bad that week. I heard Chloe's voice from the kitchen, quiet and deliberate, the voice she uses when she thinks I'm asleep. I got up and I stood in the hallway. I didn't go in. I just listened. He looked at the camera. I recorded it, Dad. Everything I heard that night is on the digital recorder in the safe. But I need you to hear it in context, so I'm going to tell you what it contained before you play it. He took a slow breath. Chloe was on the phone with Vance. They were discussing the drive to Tahoe City, the road conditions on Interstate 80 through the Donner Pass section, the specific curves on the descent from the summit. The steadiness in his voice was the most frightening thing I had ever heard from my son's mouth. And they were discussing the brakes. I stood up from the desk. I did not decide to stand. My body simply refused to remain seated after those 4 words, and I found myself at the window, with both hands braced against the frame, looking out at Lake Tahoe without seeing it. The blue water and the mountains and the October light all registering as nothing more than color and shape while my mind worked through what Liam had just told me. They were discussing the brakes. I stood at that window for perhaps 2 minutes. Then I walked back to the desk, sat down, and looked at my son's face on the screen. I know, Liam said quietly. He had recorded this knowing I would need the moment. Take whatever time you need, Dad. I'm not going anywhere. The terrible, gentle accuracy of that phrase. I pressed my fist against my mouth for 3 seconds, then lowered it. The recorder is in the safe, he continued. The yellow sticky note says, play it after the USB. I meant that. I need to tell you one more thing before you hear it because of where we live. He leaned forward slightly. California is a 2-party consent state. That means a recorded conversation is only admissible in court if all parties to the conversation have consented to being recorded. I was not a party to that conversation. I recorded it from the hallway without Chloe or Vance knowing. He paused. However, and this is what Richard Calloway explained to me when I asked, the 2-party consent rule applies to the admissibility of the recording itself. It does not prevent law enforcement from using the content of the recording as probable cause to obtain a warrant and conduct their own investigation. The recording will not be played in a courtroom, but it will get the FBI through the front door. That's all it needs to do. I picked up the recorder from the desk. It was small and cold in my palm. Play it, Dad. I pressed the button. Static for 2 seconds. Then the kitchen. I recognized the acoustics of it immediately. The slight echo off the tile, backsplash, the hum of the refrigerator underneath everything. And then Chloe's voice and the sound of it coming through that small speaker in a room her husband had built for me hit me somewhere beneath the ribcage in a way I was not prepared for. He's worse this week. Her voice was low and matter-of-fact, the voice of someone discussing a project timeline. The headaches are more frequent. He mentioned the vision thing again at dinner. A pause. Then Vance, his voice slightly thinner through the phone speaker, but clear enough. That's consistent with the progression. How much time do you think? The doctor said 4 to 6 months from diagnosis. We're at month 4. Another pause. He's still driving, still functional. But it's moving. The trip is next weekend, Vance said. I know. A sound, a chair moving Chloe, shifting her weight. I've been over the route. The descent on 80 after the summit has 3 curves in sequence where the grade exceeds 8%. In icy conditions, if the braking system is compromised, a vehicle traveling at normal highway speed would not be recoverable. The clinical precision of it, the language of someone who had done research, who had looked up road grades and braking distances and weather forecasts and assembled them into a plan with the same methodical care that Liam had assembled the evidence against her. I pressed the recorder harder against my palm until the edge of it cut into my skin. What about afterward? Vance asked. I stay home. I'm worried I'm calling him repeatedly. I'm the concerned wife who begged him not to drive in winter conditions. Her voice was smooth and practiced, as if she had rehearsed this part. The call log will show 8-9 attempts to reach him between 9 and midnight. When the highway patrol contacts me, I'm devastated. I come apart completely. Everyone who sees me will remember exactly how I reacted. And the car, mountain accident in icy conditions. The vehicle goes off the road on a descent. No other cars involved. The highway patrol will attribute it to weather and speed. They always do on that stretch in winter. A brief silence. The cameras in the area are on the eastbound lanes coming up from Reno, not the westbound descent. She had researched the camera placement on Interstate 80. She had looked up where the Caltrans traffic cameras were positioned and identified the blind spot and built her plan inside it. I turned the recorder off. I sat in the leather chair in the room my son had built for me, and I thought about the Christmas dinner 2 years ago when Chloe had reached across the table and straightened the frame of Eleanor's photograph on the mantelpiece, saying she wanted to make sure Eleanor felt present for the holiday. I thought about the way she had said it warmly, naturally, with the ease of someone who meant it. I picked the recorder back up and pressed play again because I needed to hear the rest. The brake line, Chloe said. I've watched 3 separate tutorials. It's a hydraulic system. If the line is compromised at the right connection point, the failure isn't immediate. The pressure drops gradually as fluid is lost. By the time he reaches the descent, there won't be enough hydraulic pressure left for the pedal to engage the calipers. You're sure you can do it without leaving marks? Vance asked. The connection fitting under the rear axle. Loosened, not severed. It looks like we're not interference. In a wreck that's severe, the inspection will be cursory at best. I stopped the recording for the second time and set it on the desk very carefully, the way you set down something you do not trust yourself to hold. On the screen, Liam was watching me. His hands were still folded. His face was composed. I know what you just heard, he said. I know what it cost you to hear it, and I need you to understand that by the time I recorded that conversation, I had already made my decision. His voice was quiet and absolute. I was going to drive that car, Dad. Whatever state the brakes were in, I was going to drive it, because the only way to protect you, the only way to make certain they would face consequences, was to let them believe they had succeeded. He looked directly at me through the screen. Open the laptop. Find the folder marked Garage File. It's time for you to see what happened in our garage the night before I left. The laptop folder held 3 files. I had opened the first 2 already. The third was labeled Garage File Open Last, and I had been circling it the way you circle something you are not ready to face, acknowledging its presence, keeping it in your peripheral vision, not yet willing to make it real by clicking on it. I clicked on it. The footage opened full screen without preamble. No title card, no timestamp overlay on the image itself. Just the garage rendered in the high-resolution clarity of a camera that cost more than it looked like it costs, the kind of image quality that captures not just what is present, but the texture of it. The concrete floor, the workbench along the left wall with its pegboard tool rack. 2 parking bays, the right one, empty, the left one occupied by a dark gray sedan. Liam's car, a 4-year-old Honda Accord that he had bought used and maintained with the same methodical care he brought to everything mechanical. The timestamp in the corner read Friday, October 6th. 11:47 p.m. The garage was dark except for the single fluorescent tube above the workbench, which threw a pale band of light across the left side of the space and left the right side in shadow. For 40 seconds, nothing moved. I sat with my hands flat on the desk and watched the empty garage and felt the particular dread of knowing what was coming without knowing exactly how it would look. Then the door from the house opened. Chloe stepped into the garage wearing dark clothing, a black pullover, and dark jeans, her hair pulled back. She paused just inside the door and looked around the garage with the careful scanning attention of someone confirming they are alone. Then she crossed to the workbench and reached behind the pegboard, retrieving something she had placed there earlier, a small cloth pouch, the kind that might hold tools or hardware. She set it on the workbench and unrolled it. I could not see the contents clearly. The camera angle showed the pouch from above and to the right, and the fluorescent light caught the edge of something metallic, but not its shape. What I could see clearly, what the camera captured with absolute unambiguous precision, was Chloe's face as she worked. Not frightened, not conflicted, focused in the way a person is focused when they are doing something they have practiced and know how to do. She moved to the rear of the Accord and crouched down. I turned away from the screen. I turned away because I am 67 years old and I have lived long enough to know that some images once seen cannot be managed. They become permanent fixtures in the mind, visited without invitation, and I was already carrying more permanent fixtures than I could comfortably hold. I knew what the footage showed. I did not need to see every second of it to understand what had happened in that garage at 11:47 on a Friday night. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Lake Tahoe lay still and blue under the October sky, the mountains rising from the far shore in long, unhurried lines. Eleanor had always said the Sierra Nevada looked like something that had decided to stay. Like the mountains had considered their options and found the landscape acceptable and simply remained. I had always thought that was a strange way to describe a mountain range. Standing at that window with what I had just seen pressing against the inside of my chest, I thought it was the most precise description I had ever heard. I turned back to the desk. I closed the laptop without watching the rest of the footage. I had seen enough to understand, and understanding was all I needed. I picked up my phone. There were 11 contacts in my phone, whose names I had not dialed in more than a year. Thomas Reed was one of them. We had worked together for 6 years in the Sacramento field office before I retired, 6 years of early mornings and cold coffee, and the particular grinding patience of building federal cases against people who were very good at not being caught. Thomas had stayed on after I left. He made assistant special agent in charge the year Eleanor died, and sent me a card with a handwritten note that said simply, "You would have made a better one. Call me if you ever need anything." I had never called, until now. He answered on the second ring, which told me he still kept his phone on the desk, rather than in his pocket the way agents do when they have been doing the job long enough to treat readiness as a physical habit. "Reed. Thomas, it's Arthur Crawford." A pause of exactly 1 second, the pause of someone recalibrating quickly. "Arthur, it's been a while." His voice was careful already, listening beneath the words. "You doing all right?" "No," I said. "I'm not. I need to talk to you, and I need it to be off the record until I've shown you what I have. I'm in Lake Tahoe. I can be in Sacramento by 3 o'clock. Another pause, longer. "This about Liam." "Yes. The accident." "It wasn't an accident, Thomas." The silence on the other end of the line had a different quality than the silences before it, not hesitation calculation. Thomas Reed had been calculating the weight of silences for 30 years, and he was very good at it. 3 o'clock, he said. "Come to the field office on Capitol Mall. I'll leave your name at the desk." A brief pause. "Arthur, bring everything." "I have everything," I said. My son made sure of that. I ended the call and stood in the home office for a long moment, my hands still wrapped around the phone, looking at the desk where Liam had sat to record his video. The chair, the window, the lake beyond it unchanged and indifferent and permanent in the way Eleanor had described. My son had built me a door, and then he had walked through a different one so that I would have someone to fight for. I gathered the folders, the recorder, the USB drive. I put them in the briefcase I found in the entry closet. Another thing Liam had prepared, another detail he had thought of, and I walked out of the house and locked the front door behind me with the brass key. The drive back down through the pines was quiet. At the bottom of the hill, where the 2-lane road met the highway, I stopped at the intersection and looked both ways. Then I turned south towards Sacramento and did not look back. When I pulled into the parking garage on Capitol Mall at 2:58, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Just checking in, Dad. Made chicken soup for dinner tonight. Come home whenever you're ready. We can eat together." I read it twice. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. I picked up the briefcase and walked toward the building where I had spent the best professional years of my life. Thomas Reed had not changed much in 4 years. He was leaner than I remembered, the gray at his temples, more pronounced the lines around his eyes, deeper in the way that happens to people who spend their working lives paying close attention to things that other people prefer not to see. He met me in the lobby and walked me through security without the usual visitor paperwork, which told me he had been thinking about this since the moment I ended the call. His office was on the 4th floor corner room, 2 windows. He closed the door and pulled the blinds on the interior glass panel before I had even set the briefcase on the table. "Talk to me," he said. I talked for 40 minutes. I laid out everything in the order Liam had arranged it: the house, the video, the diagnosis, the surveillance photographs, the forged insurance documents, the recorded conversation, the garage footage. Thomas did not interrupt. He sat across the table with a legal pad and wrote 3 words in the first 20 minutes, and nothing after that, which I recognized as the habit of a man whose memory is more reliable than his handwriting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The garage footage," he said. "It's cloud stored with a tamper log. Continuous upload from the moment the camera was activated. Liam set it up 6 weeks before the trip. The log shows no edits, no deletions, no access prior to this morning when I opened the file." Thomas nodded slowly. "The insurance carriers you said Liam reported the forgeries before he died. He contacted all 3 fraud investigation units directly. The policies have been flagged. No payouts have been processed." "Good." He tapped the legal pad once with the end of his pen. "That keeps the federal jurisdiction clean. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, all of it crosses state lines the moment those applications were submitted electronically to out-of-state carriers." He looked at me steadily. "Arthur, what you've brought me is not a complicated case. It's a well-documented one. Those are different things, and the difference matters." He leaned back in his chair and studied the ceiling for a moment, in the way he always had when he was arranging the sequence of a plan. "Here's what I don't want to do," he said. "I don't want to move on Chloe and Ridley tonight. The moment we bring them in, they lawyer up, they stop talking, and we spend the next 18 months in discovery. What I want instead is to let them keep moving. Let them believe the situation is developing in their favor." He looked back at me. "Which means I need you to go home." I had known this was coming. I had known it since I turned the car south on Highway 89 and started calculating the distance between Lake Tahoe and the house on Mariposa Avenue where Chloe was making soup. "Tell me what you need from me," I said. Thomas spent the next 30 minutes briefing me with the same methodical precision he had always brought to pre-operation planning. I would return home presenting as a grieving father, showing normal signs of physical and emotional deterioration. Nothing dramatic, nothing performed, simply the authentic-looking decline of a 67-year-old man carrying more than he should. The FBI's technical unit would within 48 hours install monitoring equipment in the house audio, only no video, which kept the operation within California surveillance law for authorized law enforcement recording. Thomas would open a formal investigation under federal jurisdiction and begin building the prosecutorial case in parallel with whatever Chloe and Vance chose to do next. "The soup," I said. Thomas looked at me. "She texted me while I was walking into this building. Chicken soup for dinner. She's been bringing it to me every day since the funeral." He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Don't eat it," he said. "Pour it out. Tell her it upsets your stomach if she asks." He paused. "Actually save it. Whatever container she gives it to you in, seal it and put it somewhere cold. I'll have someone pick it up within 24 hours for analysis." I thought about my son's video, the careful architecture of everything he had prepared, the months he had spent building a case that he would never see prosecuted. I thought about Toby Marsh holding that envelope in the church parking lot, with both hands the seriousness of a child who has been trusted with something real. "One more thing," Thomas said, leaning forward. "You said Liam mentioned she installed a monitoring application on the home network. He found it in the traffic log. He didn't remove it because he didn't want her to know he'd found it. Good instinct." Thomas wrote something on the legal pad, the first thing he had written in 30 minutes. "Don't remove it either. Don't change your device habits. If she's been watching network traffic since the funeral, she's already built a baseline of your behavior. Deviating from that baseline is the one thing that could alert her before we're ready." He stood and extended his hand across the table. "Arthur?" His grip was firm and brief. "Your son built us a case. Our job now is to close it." I shook his hand. I picked up the briefcase. Thomas kept copies of everything, and I walked back through the federal building and out into the Sacramento afternoon, where the light was going amber over the Capitol dome and the streets were filling with the ordinary end-of-day traffic of a city that did not know what was moving through it. I drove back to Fresno on autopilot the way you drive a road you have driven 1,000 times, the body handling the mechanics while the mind does something else entirely. What my mind did for the 2 hours between Sacramento and home was go back through 34 years of being Liam's father, the go-kart, the engineering degree, the careful, considered way he had approached every problem he had ever faced, identifying the variables, eliminating what could not be controlled, focusing everything on what could. He had approached his own death the same way. I pulled into the driveway on Mariposa Avenue at 7:40 in the evening. The kitchen light was on. Through the front window I could see the warm glow of a lamp in the living room and the shadow of movement inside Chloe, moving through my house and my kitchen with her soup and her performance of devotion. I sat in the car for 30 seconds. Then I reached into the glove compartment, took out the small amber prescription bottle Thomas had pressed into my hand. As I left the building, a mild antiemetic he had said to counteract anything she might be introducing into the food before the lab results confirmed what it was, and I put it in my shirt pocket. I got out of the car. I walked up the front path. I opened the door. "Dad." Chloe's voice came from the kitchen, warm and immediate. I was starting to worry. "How was your drive?" Long, I said, hanging up my coat and my keys. "But I feel better for it." I walked into the kitchen and looked at the woman who had planned my son's death, and I smiled the smile of a tired old man who was very glad to be home. The soup arrived the next morning, not in the evening, the way people typically bring food to the grieving, a casserole left on the doorstep, a container pressed into your hands at the end of a visit. Chloe brought it at 9 in the morning in a wide-mouthed thermos that she set on the kitchen counter with the deliberateness of someone establishing a routine. She ladled it into a bowl herself, carried it to the table, and set it in front of me with the kind of careful attention that would have looked to anyone watching like simple kindness. "You didn't eat dinner last night," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I noticed." "I wasn't hungry," I said. "The drive wore me out." She watched me with those wide, attentive eyes, the same eyes that had looked across my Christmas table for 4 years and given nothing away. "You need to eat, Dad. You can't grieve on an empty stomach. That's what my mother always said." I looked down at the bowl. The soup was golden fragrant with thin sliced carrots and what appeared to be egg noodles. It looked exactly like the kind of soup a devoted daughter-in-law would make for a grieving father. It looked like nothing else at all. "Let me get a spoon," I said, and stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer. And while my back was to her, I slid the small glass vial from my shirt pocket Thomas had given me, 6 of them each the size of a perfume sample, and filled it from the bowl I had carried from the table under the pretense of adding crackers from the cabinet. I capped it and slipped it back into my pocket in the same motion. Then I sat back down and ate 4 spoonfuls and told her it was wonderful. She smiled and said she was glad and stayed for another 40 minutes, asking me gentle questions about how I was sleeping, whether I had spoken to anyone from Liam's firm about the estate paperwork, whether I had thought about grief counseling. She mentioned twice that she had spoken with a financial advisor who had worked with Liam, someone who might be able to help me understand what assets were in Liam's name and how to access them. I said I would think about it. She nodded and said there was no rush, absolutely no rush. She just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. After she left, I poured the remaining soup carefully down the kitchen sink, rinsed the bowl, and placed the sealed vial in the back of the refrigerator behind a jar of pickles, where it would stay cold until Thomas sent someone to collect it. "She's been on the network every day since the funeral," he said, without preamble, "checking device activity, monitoring browsing history. Nothing on your end has flagged anything unusual for her because you haven't searched anything unusual. Keep it that way." A brief pause. "The vial, I'll have someone at your door tomorrow morning at 7. Tell Chloe you have an early doctor's appointment if she asks." The lab results came back 4 days later. Thomas called me on my cell phone while I was sitting in the backyard, watching the lemon tree drop its last October fruit onto the grass. "Digoxin," he said, "pharmaceutical grade consistent with a compounded preparation rather than a standard prescription formulation. Low concentration, sub-therapeutic in a single dose, cumulative over time." He paused. "Arthur, taken daily at this concentration over a period of 6 to 10 weeks, the effect on cardiac function in a man your age would be indistinguishable from natural heart disease progression." Digoxin, a compound derived from the foxglove plant used therapeutically in precise, carefully monitored doses to regulate heart rhythm in patients with specific cardiac conditions. Used incorrectly administered steadily and visibly in the soup of a 67-year-old widower who had no prior cardiac history, it would produce exactly the symptoms of a heart that was simply giving out. Vance, I said, purchased through an online pharmacy registered in Nevada, paid through a prepaid account we've already traced to a debit card purchased at a Walgreens in Sacramento 6 weeks ago. The card was activated using a phone number registered to a burner device. Thomas's voice was dry, with the particular dryness of a federal agent who has seen this category of preparation before. He was careful. Not careful enough, but careful. They've been planning this since before Liam died, I said. The purchase date on the compound precedes the accident by 11 days. I sat with that for a moment, watching a lemon roll slowly across the grass until it came to rest against the base of the garden hose. 11 days before Liam's car went off the road on a descent in the Sierra Nevada, Vance Ridley had purchased a cardiac compound through a traceable but deliberately obscured channel and given it to my daughter-in-law to administer to me. Not to Liam. To me. They were always planning 2 stages, I said. It was not a question. That's how it reads, Thomas said. Liam first for the insurance, then you for the estate. Your house, your retirement accounts, whatever assets transfer to Chloe as the surviving spouse's family connection, everything she could establish a legal claim to once you were gone. He paused. The digoxin was stage 2, Arthur. You were never a bystander in this. 3 days after the lab results, Vance came to the house. He arrived at 10 in the morning in a dark blue sedan, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a soft leather portfolio, and he introduced himself at the front door as David Kellerman from Central Valley Wealth Management, a colleague of Liam's financial advisor who had been asked to reach out regarding some estate administration matters that required my attention. He was polished and unhurried and entirely convincing. He had a business card. He had a rehearsed explanation for why his firm was involved that was detailed enough to deflect casual questions, but not detailed enough to survive scrutiny. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened the portfolio and produced a stack of documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before. These are fairly routine. He said, his voice smooth and reassuring, in the way of someone who has been told to project calm. Transfer of property administration. It just ensures that the assets in Liam's name can be properly managed during the estate settlement period. Your signature on the highlighted lines simply authorizes the process to begin. I looked at the documents. They were designed to appear routine. 4 pages of dense legal language with yellow highlight strips on 6 signature lines, formatted to resemble standard estate administration paperwork. A person who was grieving and overwhelmed and trusting would have signed without reading. I read every word of the last page. Buried in the 3rd paragraph of the final section, beneath language about administrative authorization and asset management protocols, were 11 words that changed the character of the entire document, including full transfer of ownership rights for all associated real property. The house in Lake Tahoe, Liam's gift, my door. I looked up at Vance Ridley at David Kellerman, and I felt the cold, deliberate stillness that had replaced my grief settle even deeper and become something harder and more permanent. Let me get my reading glasses, I said. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I did not get my reading glasses. I went to the bedroom and stood beside the dresser for 60 seconds, breathing deliberately the way Thomas had taught me 30 years ago, when we were running operations that required you to walk back into a room, already knowing what you were going to find, and behave as though you did not. Then I picked up the reading glasses from the nightstand, returned to the kitchen table, and sat back down across from Vance Ridley. He had not moved. He was sitting with the portfolio open in front of him, pen uncapped, his expression arranged into the patient, helpful look of a man waiting for a formality to conclude. He was good. If I had not spent 6 years building federal cases against people who were good, I might have found him entirely convincing. I put on the reading glasses and made a performance of studying the documents. I read slowly, running my finger along several lines, pausing to squint. Then I looked up. I appreciate you coming out, I said. I really do. But I had a conversation with Liam's attorney last week, Richard Calloway, up in Sacramento, And he mentioned something about needing to review all estate documents before I sign anything. I'm sure that's just him being thorough. I folded my hands on top of the papers. Could I keep these overnight and call you tomorrow? Something moved behind Vance's eyes. It was brief and well controlled, but I had spent too many years watching people's faces in interview rooms to miss it. Of course, he said, his voice maintaining its smooth register without a tremor. Absolutely no rush. Take all the time you need. He recapped the pen. He gathered most of the documents back into the portfolio, but left the signature pages on the table, a calculated choice leaving the instrument of the transaction in the room, even after the transaction had been deferred. I noticed it. I did not acknowledge it. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, walking him to the door with the slightly shuffling gait I had been practicing since the night before. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just the barely perceptible slowing of a man whose joints were registering the accumulated weight of his grief. He shook my hand. His grip was firm and dry. Take care of yourself, Mr. Crawford, he said. Doing my best, I told him. I watched his sedan back out of the driveway and turn north. Then I went inside, called Thomas, and told him what had happened. Good, Thomas said. Don't call Calloway's office from the house phone or your cell. They may be monitoring your outgoing calls as well. I'll have someone contact Richard directly. A pause. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said. Arthur? I'm functioning, I said. That's the honest answer. It'll have to do. His voice carried the pragmatic warmth of a man who understood that functioning was sometimes the best available option. The monitoring equipment goes in tonight. You'll hear a utility truck outside around 11. Don't acknowledge it. The equipment went in that night as promised. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of a quiet residential street and felt the particular strangeness of knowing that my house was now both a trap and a stage, that every room had become a performance space, that every interaction with Chloe from this point forward would be simultaneously real and recorded. I began the performance the following morning. It was not difficult to find the material. I was 67 years old and genuinely grieving my only child, and the symptoms of a man whose body is registering loss. The slower movements, the occasional tremor in the hands, the moments of apparent confusion that are actually just the mind going somewhere private were not far below the surface. I did not manufacture them. I simply stopped concealing them and let Chloe see what was real and allowed her to interpret it as something more than it was. The soup came every morning. I sampled 4 spoonfuls from each bowl, enough to maintain the fiction that I was eating it, and transferred the remainder into the collection system Thomas's team had installed behind my bedroom closet. It was elegant in its simplicity, a series of sealed specimen containers mounted on a rack behind the back panel, each labeled with a date, each connected to a small refrigeration unit the size of a shoebox. I filled one container every 3 days. Thomas collected them every week. By the end of the 3rd week, we had 9 containers. By the end of the 6th, 22. Each one sealed, labeled temperature maintained chain of custody, documented from the moment it left the collection rack to the moment it arrived at the FBI's forensic laboratory in Sacramento. 22 containers of evidence that Chloe carried into my house every morning in a wide-mouthed thermos and set on my table with a smile. Chloe, for her part, played her own role with commitment. She asked me weekly about the estate paperwork, always gently, always framing it as concern rather than urgency. She mentioned David Kellerman twice more. He was so helpful. She said really knew his way around these documents. Such a relief to have someone who understood this sort of thing. I said, yes, I'd needed to call him. I kept meaning to call him. The days all ran together when you were grieving. She mentioned at the end of the 5th week that she had been in touch with a grief counselor who specialized in elderly clients experiencing complicated bereavement. She wondered if I might benefit from speaking with someone. She had already made an inquiry, she said. Just an inquiry. I thanked her. I said I would consider it. I watched her face as she processed my non-committal response and saw the very faint recalibration behind her eyes, the adjustment of a timeline that was not moving as quickly as projected. On the 43rd day of the operation, it was a Saturday afternoon, and Chloe had just left after her morning visit. I was in the backyard deadheading the roses along the rear fence, something I had not done in weeks, but had chosen today because it put me in view of the back gate and required no explanation for being outside. Toby came around the corner of the fence with his hands in his jacket pockets and his expression carrying the concentrated seriousness that had not left his face since the church parking lot. "Mr. Reed asked me to tell you they found something new," he said quietly without preamble, standing close to the fence so that his voice did not carry. "He says you should check the mailbox at the post office downtown, box 431. The key is under the third stepping stone from the left." I did not look toward the house. "Thank you, Toby," I said, and went back to the roses. He was gone in 30 seconds, the back gate clicking shut behind him with the same quiet efficiency with which he did everything. 11 years old and already understanding with the instinct of a child who has been trusted with something consequential that the best thing you can do with important information is deliver it and leave. I found the key that evening. In the post office box on Monday morning, I found a single photograph and a handwritten note from Thomas. The photograph showed Chloe's car parked outside a storage facility in northeast Fresno. The note said, "She's moving documents. We think she's preparing to run. We need to accelerate the timeline. Call me tonight from the payphone on Blackstone Avenue." I read the note twice, memorized it, and dropped it in the post office trash can. Then I drove home, through the late October morning, the almond orchards bare on both sides of the highway, and thought about what accelerating the timeline was going to require of me. The payphone on Blackstone Avenue smelled of cigarette smoke and old plastic, and it took me 3 tries to remember how to use one. I had not operated a payphone since the mid-90s. You forget the weight of the receiver, the particular mechanical click of depositing coins, the way the dial tone sounds different through a public line than through a private one. I stood in the phone booth with my back to the street and fed 2 quarters into the slot and dialed the number Thomas had written on the note. He answered on the first ring. "She's accessed a storage unit in her name in northeast Fresno," he said without greeting. "Rented it 8 weeks ago, paid cash in advance for 6 months. Our surveillance team documented 3 visits in the past 2 weeks, each time carrying a document bag. We believe she's moving financial records and personal items, preparing an exit." A pause. "Arthur, if she runs before we have everything in place, we lose the elder abuse charges. The digoxin evidence is strong, but a good defense attorney argues it was therapeutic intent gone wrong. We need her in the act." "What does in the act look like?" I said. "It looks like her believing she's in the final stage," Thomas said. "She needs to think you're close enough to the end that she's willing to move on the estate documents. That means you need to give her a reason to push harder." Another pause. "I need you to get worse." I understood what he was asking. Not worse in the way of the slow, authentic decline I had been allowing to show, worse in the way of a man whose condition has taken a sudden and alarming turn, the kind of deterioration that creates urgency in someone who has been waiting for a natural conclusion. "How much worse?" I said, confused about recent events, difficulty recalling conversations, some unsteadiness. "Nothing that requires medical attention. If she thinks you need a hospital, it complicates our position. But enough that she believes the window is closing faster than she projected." I drove home from the payphone and sat in the car in the driveway for 10 minutes, building the new version of myself that the next stage required. Then I went inside and told Chloe, who was in the kitchen, washing the thermos, that I had driven to the grocery store that morning, but had forgotten what I went for, and had come home with a bag of rice and a box of aluminum foil instead of the milk I needed. She turned from the sink slowly. Her eyes moved across my face with a focused attention that had nothing to do with concern. "Dad," she said carefully, "that's the second time this week you've mentioned forgetting where you were going." "Is it?" I said. "I don't remember the first time." I watched something shift behind her expression. A controlled private settling, like a weight that had been held in uncertain suspension, finally coming to rest on a surface that could bear it. "I think we need to get you to a doctor," she said. "Soon. Let me make some calls." "I'm sure it's just the grief," I said. "Eleanor used to say I had a head like a sieve when I was under stress." "Still," she said, "let me make some calls." She made the calls. She scheduled an appointment with a physician I had never seen at a practice I had never visited, not my own doctor, whom I had been seeing for 11 years, and who would have found nothing wrong. Thomas had anticipated this, and arranged for a cooperating physician affiliated with the Bureau to be available if Chloe attempted to place Arthur Crawford into the care of someone she had selected rather than someone I trusted. The appointment was scheduled and then quietly rescheduled, and then through a series of administrative complications I did not need to understand in detail never occurred. Chloe did not press it. She noted the missed appointment and moved to something else. What she moved to was the question of the estate documents. "David Kellerman called me," she said, "on a Wednesday morning in early December, setting the thermos on the table with a little more deliberateness than usual. He said you still hadn't returned his call. He's worried the processing window is going to close. Apparently there are deadlines in the estate administration that we're getting close to." "I meant to call him," I said, looking at the table rather than at her. "I keep forgetting." She pulled the signature pages from her bag, the same ones Vance had left on the table 6 weeks ago, now carried by Chloe as though she had simply retrieved them at some point. She laid them flat in front of me and uncapped a pen. "It's just the authorization pages, Dad. Richard Calloway would tell you the same thing. It's standard procedure. You don't even need to read it again, just the highlighted lines." I picked up the pen. I held it over the first signature line for a long moment. Then I set it down. "I think I need to rest first," I said. "My head has been bad this morning. Let me rest and I'll look at it this afternoon." The frustration she suppressed in that moment was the most honest thing I had seen from Chloe in 2 months. She contained it within 3 seconds, which was impressive, but 3 seconds is a long time when you are watching for it. The change happened on a Thursday morning in the second week of December. I was at the kitchen table when Chloe arrived, and I noticed immediately that something in her manner was different. She was faster than usual, more purposeful with the clipped efficiency of someone who has decided to stop waiting. She set the thermos down and poured the soup and carried it to the table, and then, while I was looking at it, she went to the counter and poured a glass of water from the pitcher she had started bringing 3 weeks ago, insisting that I was not hydrating enough, that the dry Central Valley air was hard on elderly systems, that she wanted to see me drinking more during the day. I had been emptying that glass into the potted fern by the window for 3 weeks. Today she stood beside the table and watched me pick up the water glass. "Drink it while it's cold," she said. "It's better cold." I raised the glass and tipped it to my lips and let the water touch my mouth without swallowing. The way Thomas had shown me the glass held at an angle that looked like drinking, and was not a technique he had learned from an operation in the late 90s that I had not been part of, but had heard about enough times to understand the mechanics. That afternoon, I called Thomas. "How long?" I said. 3 days, he said. "I need 3 more days to position everyone. Vance is in Sacramento. Our surveillance has him meeting with a travel agent, which is consistent with exit preparation. We want both of them in the net at the same moment." He paused. "Arthur, I need you to do one more thing. Tomorrow morning, come to the field office. Use the back entrance on L Street. Tell Chloe you have a doctor's appointment." "What for?" "There's something we need to walk you through," he said. "Something about how the next 3 days are going to look." His voice was steady and deliberate. "Your son built the case, Arthur. The closing argument is ours." That night, I sat in the home office, Liam's office, the one at the house on Mariposa, where he had done his college applications and his graduate schoolwork and the quiet late-night projects that had always been his version of thinking out loud, and I looked at the photograph on the desk. The 3 of us at Christmas. Liam between Eleanor's empty chair and me, his head tilted, both of us caught mid-laugh. I pressed my hand flat over his face in the photograph and held it there. 3 more days, I said to the empty room. The back entrance on L Street was a plain gray door with no signage accessed through a service alley between 2 federal buildings, and I had used it exactly twice in my 6 years, with the bureau both times on operations where the front lobby was not an option. Walking through it on a Friday morning in December felt like stepping back into a version of myself I had set aside at retirement, the way you set aside a coat you no longer need, but cannot bring yourself to give away. Thomas was waiting inside with 2 other agents I did not know, a woman and a man, both younger than 40, both carrying the focused economy of movement that comes from field experience. He introduced them only by first names Janet and Paul, which told me their involvement in the operation was not going to appear in any document that Chloe's eventual defense team might subpoena. "Here's what the next 3 days look like," Thomas said, spreading a single sheet of paper on the table between us. It was a timeline handwritten spare and precise. "Vance Ridley has booked 2 airline tickets departing Sacramento International on Sunday evening. We believe the second ticket is for Chloe. The reservation is under the name David Kellerman, which confirms he's still operating under the fabricated identity." He tapped the paper. "They're planning to be gone before the 1st of the year, which means whatever move Chloe makes on the estate documents, she makes it in the next 48 hours. "She'll push hard today," I said. "Yes." He looked at me steadily. Which is why this morning needs to look like any other morning. You go home, you let her bring the soup. You go through the routine. But at some point today, she is going to see something that worries her. What something? You leaving the house, going somewhere she can't account for. He paused. She's been tracking your movements since the funeral. In 10 weeks you have left this house for 4 documented purposes. The drive to clear your head, the doctor's appointment, that didn't happen, 2 trips to the grocery store. Today you're going to take a walk, a long one, in the direction of the park on Divisadero. He looked at me. Thomas Okafor lives on Divisadero. I understood. Thomas Okafor was a retired postal worker who had lived 3 houses down from me for 20 years, and who had absolutely nothing to do with any federal investigation. But to anyone monitoring network activity and cross-referencing it with the movements of a surveillance subject, a 67-year-old man walking to visit an elderly neighbor looked precisely like a 67-year-old man walking to visit an elderly neighbor. Unless you were Chloe, who had spent 10 weeks mapping every variable and had concluded that there were no variables she had not mapped. She'll follow me, I said. She'll watch you go, Thomas said. And she will not like what she sees, because Thomas Okafor's house is on the same block as the residence of one of our field agents, and the field agent will be sitting on his front porch when you walk past. And you will stop and speak to him for 4 minutes, and from the correct angle that conversation will look like something it is not. He folded his hands. It will look like a man who is not as confused as he has been presenting. I drove home from the L Street entrance and ate a real breakfast for the first time in weeks, standing at the kitchen counter, because sitting felt like something I did not have the patience for. Then Chloe arrived with the thermos. The morning routine proceeded as it had proceeded for 10 weeks. Soup. 4 spoonfuls, the glass of water she poured and watched, the signature pages she produced today with a new layer of urgency beneath the gentleness she mentioned twice, that David Kellerman had indicated the processing window was closing, that missing it would mean significant complications for the estate, that it was really just a formality. I told her I was feeling better today. I said I thought I might take a walk. She said that was wonderful, that fresh air was exactly what I needed, and the brightness in her voice had the particular quality of something that has been held in reserve and released at the first available opportunity. I walked to Divisadero at 2 in the afternoon. I spoke to the man on the porch whose name he told me, with the easy comfort of someone playing a familiar role, was Frank for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I did not look back toward the street while we spoke. I did not need to. I knew Chloe's car was there, and I knew what she was seeing, and I knew what conclusion she was drawing from it. I was home by 3:15. Chloe's car was gone. She came back at 5:30 with the evening thermos, in a manner that had changed in some fundamental and irreversible way. The gentleness was still there, the attentiveness, the performance of devotion. But underneath it now was something harder and more deliberate, the way asphalt looks the same on the surface, but has been fundamentally altered by what is moving through it under pressure. She stayed through dinner. She washed up. She said goodnight with both hands wrapped around mine, squeezing once before she let go. She said she would see me in the morning. She came back at 11:45. I heard the front door. She still had her key. She had always had her key, and I heard her moving through the house with the careful quiet of someone who believes the person they are approaching is asleep. I was in bed in the dark, my breathing slow and regular, the prescription bottle Thomas had given me on my first visit sitting on the nightstand, where I had placed it that morning after taking the correct dosage at the correct time. She came into the bedroom. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the soft sound of something being set on the bedside table. The water glass, I realized, the one from the kitchen, carried from the other room, different from the one that had been there when I went to bed. Then I heard her cross to the bedroom door. The lock engaged from the outside with a sound I would not have recognized if Thomas had not told me exactly what it would sound. Like a simple slide bolt she had installed on the exterior of the door frame, at some point in the past, weak and visible unless you were looking at the outside of the door from the hallway, impossible to operate from inside the room. California Penal Code, Section 236, false imprisonment. The unlawful violation of another person's personal liberty. A wobbler offense that becomes a felony when committed against a person over 65 years of age in circumstances involving a pattern of elder abuse. Thomas had recited the statute to me, verbatim, on the L Street morning. He had wanted me to know the precise legal weight of what was going to happen tonight. The house went quiet. I lay in the dark and breathed and waited. And after approximately 12 minutes, I heard from the direction of the hallway window that faced the back garden, the quiet sound of the window screen being lifted from its frame. Then a small voice. I sat up. I reached for the bedside light, thought better of it, and moved to the window in the dark. Toby was outside on the narrow ledge of the back porch roof, 11 years old and completely calm, with the spare key to the exterior slide bolt in his right hand, a key Thomas had cut from the one Chloe had used at the hardware store, traced through the store's key-cutting log, and duplicated without her knowledge. "Can you open the bedroom door from the outside?" I whispered. "Give me 60 seconds," I said. "Then open it." I moved to the center of the room and stood in the dark and felt with a clarity that had nothing to do with the prescription Thomas had given me, and everything to do with the accumulated weight of the past 10 weeks, entirely and completely awake. Then the lock clicked open. Toby pushed the door open 6 inches and stopped. "She's in the living room," he whispered through the gap. "She came back inside after she locked the door. She's been on the phone." I moved to the door and listened. From the far end of the house came the low, controlled murmur of Chloe's voice, too quiet to make out words, too deliberate to be casual. She was giving instructions or receiving them. Either way, she was not watching the bedroom door. "Go back out the window," I told Toby quietly. "Down to the yard. Stay by the back gate and do not move until you see the cars come." "Then we're both right," I said. "Go." He went, pulling the window closed behind him, with the careful silence of a child who has been told exactly how much noise is too much, and has decided to make none at all. I stood in the bedroom doorway and waited. She came down the hallway 4 minutes later. She was carrying a leather portfolio. Not Vance's, a different one, smaller and personal, the kind a woman might keep in a bedside drawer or a car's glove compartment. She was wearing her coat, which told me she had not planned to stay long after this was finished. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was composed with a particular blankness of someone who has moved past the performing stage and arrived at the executing stage where expression is a liability rather than an asset. She pushed open the bedroom door and stopped. I was sitting up in bed. The bedside lamp was on. I was wearing my reading glasses and holding the copy of East of Eden from the Tahoe house, which I had brought back to Fresno and placed on the nightstand the day I returned, and I was looking at her over the top of it with the mild, slightly confused expression of a man who has been woken from light sleep by an unexpected sound. "Chloe," I said. "It's past midnight." She recovered in under 2 seconds, which was impressive. "Dad, I'm so sorry I was worried about you. I thought I heard something. I wanted to check." She crossed to the bedside chair and sat down the portfolio in her lap, and her voice dropped into its softest register. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep?" "A little," I said. She opened the portfolio. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, and she unfolded it on her knee with deliberate care. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the estate situation. I know you've been having trouble keeping track of things lately, and I don't want you to lose out on anything because of the paperwork delays. This is something Richard Calloway's office prepared." She held the paper out toward me. "It's straightforward. It just makes sure that if anything happens to you before the estate is formally settled, there's no gap in the administration." The document was 1 page. It was not from Richard Calloway's office. I could tell that from 4 feet away by the font and the margin widths, which did not match the letterhead I had seen on every piece of correspondence from his firm over the past 3 months. But I took it from her hands and looked at it with the careful, slow attention of a man reading something that requires effort. At the bottom was a signature line, and beside it, a fingerprint box, the kind used in documents that anticipate the signatory may have difficulty with a conventional signature. A small ink pad, the disposable kind, sat in the fold of the portfolio. She had thought of everything. "Just your thumbprint there," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of pure performance. "It's the same as a signature legally. Richard's office handles these all the time for elderly clients." I looked at the fingerprint box for a long moment. Then I reached out and pressed my right thumb firmly onto the ink pad and then firmly onto the box on the document. Chloe took the paper back. She looked at it. She lifted it slightly toward the lamp to see the impression more clearly, and she went completely still. The thumbprint on the document was clear and well-defined, but beside it, already there, when I had taken the paper from her hands and visible against the white background, until the ink from my thumb made the surrounding surface visible by contrast, was a second print, smaller. The distinctive loop and whirl pattern of a different person's finger, pressed there in transparent lifting compound by Thomas's forensic team 3 days ago, when they had processed the sheet of paper that Chloe had left in the kitchen drawer 6 weeks earlier, her own thumbprint. Lifted from the thermos she had carried into my kitchen every morning for 10 weeks, transferred to this document with a precision that would hold up in any federal court in the country. The document she had brought to get my fingerprint on already had hers. She looked up from the paper. She looked at me. I took off the reading glasses. I set the book on the nightstand. I pushed back the covers and stood up from the bed, and I stood at my full height, 6 feet 1 inch, the same as the day I joined the Bureau 40 years ago. And I looked at my daughter-in-law across the width of my son's bedroom. "Chloe," I said, "I haven't eaten a single spoonful of your soup in 10 weeks. Her face did not collapse. It did not crumple or dissolve the way faces do in films when the revelation comes. Instead, it went through something more precise and more terrible, a sequence of micro-adjustments, each one the recalibration of a person who is very quickly processing a situation and finding no exit in any direction. Her eyes moved to the bedroom door, to the window, back to me. "I think you should sit down," I said. I walked to the dresser and picked up the television remote, a small flat screen mounted on the wall opposite the bed, installed by Thomas's team, when they put in the monitoring equipment connected to a receiver in the living room. I pressed the input button twice. The screen came on. The footage from the garage camera filled it. High resolution, time-stamped the fluorescent light of the workbench, casting its pale band across the left half of the frame. 11:47 p.m. Friday. October 6th. The door from the house opening. A woman in dark clothing stepping into the garage and pausing to confirm she was alone. Chloe's face on the screen. Chloe's hands on the workbench. Chloe moving to the rear of the dark gray Accord. Chloe in this room watching herself on the screen said nothing. But her breathing changed. I heard it a single sharp intake that she controlled, immediately pressing her lips together, her knuckles whitening around the leather portfolio. "My son built this case," I said quietly. "Every piece of it. He spent the last months of his life making sure you would not get away with what you did to him." My voice was steady and even and came from somewhere deeper than grief. "He asked me to finish it. That's what I've been doing." From the street outside, the first siren sounded, then the second, then the third. Blue and red light moved across the bedroom ceiling in slow, sweeping arcs, filling the room with the particular color of consequence. And I watched Chloe's face in that light and saw for the first and only time in 4 years of knowing her, the expression beneath the performance, not fear exactly and not regret, but the specific terrible recognition of a person who has understood too late and all at once that they have been outmaneuvered by someone they had entirely underestimated. Heavy footsteps on the front porch, a knock that was not a request. "Federal agents, open the door." I walked past Chloe without looking at her again down the hall and opened the front door myself. Thomas Reed was standing on my porch in his bureau jacket, 2 agents flanking him, the cold December night air moving through the open door and into the house where my son's photograph still sat on the living room shelf. "Arthur?" Thomas said. "She's in the bedroom," I said. "The portfolio has the document with both prints. The water glass on the nightstand is untouched, same compound as the others." He nodded once. He stepped inside. I walked out onto the porch and stood in the cold and looked up at the December sky over Fresno, which was clear and full of stars in the way the Central Valley sky gets in winter when the tulle fog has not yet settled, and I breathed the cold air in through my nose and out through my mouth and felt for the first time in 10 weeks the specific and enormous relief of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, with great care and at great cost, set it down exactly where it needed to go. Vance Ridley was arrested at Sacramento International Airport at 11:22 that same night. Thomas told me about it the following morning, standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee I had made for both of us. Real coffee dark roast, the first cup I had made for company in 10 weeks, that did not require me to monitor what was being added to it. Vance had arrived at the departures terminal with 2 carry-on bags and a one-way ticket to Cancun under the name David Kellerman. The agents from the Sacramento field office had let him check in, let him pass through security, let him walk to the gate and sit down and open his phone before they approached him. Thomas said they preferred it that way. A man sitting in an airport gate with a boarding pass for a one-way international flight under a fabricated identity has already by that moment committed several distinct federal crimes simultaneously, and every additional minute he sits there builds the evidentiary record. He asked for a lawyer before they finished reading him his rights, Thomas said, setting down his mug, which is exactly what a man does when he knows precisely what he's facing. Did he say anything before that? 2 words. Thomas looked at me. Her name. Chloe had spent the night in federal custody in Sacramento. By the time her attorney arrived at 7 the following morning, the charging document was 11 pages long and cited violations of federal wire fraud statutes, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain, elder abuse resulting in bodily harm, false imprisonment of a protected person, and identity fraud. The attorney, a criminal defense specialist out of San Francisco who charged $400 an hour and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to extracting clients from difficult situations, read through all 11 pages without visible reaction, then asked to speak with Chloe alone. The conversation lasted 19 minutes. Afterward, the attorney requested a meeting with the federal prosecutor. Vance's attorney made the same request 40 minutes later. In the federal system, when 2 co-defendants' attorneys request simultaneous meetings with the prosecution within hours of arraignment, it generally means that both defendants have rapidly calculated the weight of the evidence against them and have arrived at the same conclusion that the most favorable outcome available is not acquittal, but cooperation. The difference between those 2 attorneys' meetings was that Vance's attorney made an explicit proffer of cooperation within the first 10 minutes, and Chloe's attorney did not. That difference, Thomas explained to me later, was the difference between 25 years and the rest of her life. Vance cooperated fully and immediately with the thoroughness of a man who has decided that the most important thing now is to establish clearly and on the record that the person across the table from him bears primary responsibility for everything that occurred. He provided a detailed written statement covering the origin of the plan, the forged insurance applications, the compound purchased through the Nevada pharmacy, the surveillance application installed on the home network, the storage unit in Northeast Fresno, where Chloe had been consolidating documents in preparation for flight. He confirmed that Chloe had acted without his knowledge on the night of Friday, October 6th, that he had known it would happen and had done nothing to prevent it, but that the specific action in the garage had been hers alone, unassisted and unwitnessed. The federal prosecutor used his statement to build the murder conspiracy charge from the ground up. The garage footage established the act. The voice recording established the planning. Vance's statement established the financial motive and the coordination. Liam's evidence assembled in the months before his death, preserved in a cloud account with an unbroken tamper log delivered to a retired federal agent through a brass key, and a boy on a bicycle established everything else. He trial began in federal district court in Sacramento on the 14th of October, 2025. Exactly 1 year and 8 days after the phone call at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning that had broken my kitchen in half. I testified on the 3rd day. The prosecutor walked me through everything in sequence: the house in Lake Tahoe, the video, the cancer, the photographs, the forged documents, the recordings, the soup, the 10 weeks of cooperation with the Bureau. I spoke for 4 hours and 17 minutes. I kept my voice level and my hands still on the railing of the witness box, the way Thomas had taught me to do in federal court 3 decades ago. Because juries read composure as credibility, and I needed them to believe every word. Chloe's defense attorney was competent and prepared and working with almost nothing. The argument he constructed that Liam's tumor had produced paranoid ideation, that the evidence was the product of a dying man's disordered thinking, that Chloe had been the victim of an elaborate conspiracy of misinterpretation, collapsed under the weight of the garage footage within the first hour of deliberation. Forensic analysis had confirmed that the brake system failure was not consistent with normal mechanical wear. The compound residue in 22 sealed specimen containers, each one date-labeled and chain of custody documented, confirmed the digoxin. The thumbprint on the coerced document confirmed the night of December 15th. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 40 minutes. I sat in the front row of the gallery throughout with Thomas on my left, and an empty seat on my right that I had asked to be left vacant. I did not look at Chloe during the reading of the verdict. I looked at the empty seat. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, the foreperson read her voice carrying the particular steadiness of someone who has spent 3 hours arriving at a decision and is now committed to it. We, the jury, find the defendant Chloe Marie Crawford guilty. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. The judge, a 61-year-old woman who had spent 11 years on the federal bench and who delivered her sentences with the economy of someone who had said difficult things many times and had no patience for theatrical excess, sentenced Chloe to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. She cited the premeditation, the duration of the conspiracy, the exploitation of a terminally ill spouse, and the sustained campaign of elder abuse against the vulnerable victim. Vance received 25 years. I was standing on the courthouse steps in the November afternoon light when they brought Chloe out. She was in the custody of 2 federal marshals, her wrists secured in front of her, wearing the same dark coat she had worn on the night she locked my bedroom door. The Sacramento wind cut down L Street with the particular bite of a Northern California November, and she walked past me at a distance of perhaps 12 feet, moving toward the transport vehicle at the curb. She turned her head and looked at me. I had expected many things from that moment. I had thought about it in the weeks between the arrest and the trial, turning it over. The way you turn over an object in your hands in the dark, trying to understand its shape before you can see it. I had expected anger or defiance or the cold blankness she had worn through most of the proceedings. What I saw instead was something I had not anticipated and do not have a precise word for. Not remorse, not exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a person who has been performing for a very long time and has finally irrevocably run out of audience. She looked away first. The transport door closed. The vehicle pulled into traffic on L Street and disappeared around the corner onto Capitol Mall, and I stood on the courthouse steps with my hands in my coat pockets and watched it go. Thomas appeared beside me. He did not say anything immediately, which was one of the things I had always valued about him, the understanding that some moments do not require narration. After a while, he said, "What do you want to do now, old friend?" I looked north toward the Sierra Nevada, invisible from here, but present the way things are present when you know exactly where they are. "I know where I'm going," I said. The light comes early at Lake Tahoe in November. It arrives before the sun clears the mountains to the east, spreading first as a pale brightening along the ridgeline, then as a slow wash of amber that moves down through the pines and across the water, until the whole lake is lit from the surface up. I had watched this particular light from the window of the home office every morning for the past 11 months, and I had not yet arrived at the end of what it had to teach me. Liam had known it would be like this. He had positioned the desk precisely to face west, and in the mornings, the light came in from behind and fell across the wood grain in a way that was not visible at any other time of day. He had sat here and watched the same light and had thought of me sitting here after he was gone. That knowledge, the specific detailed love of a man who plans a gift by imagining the recipient in its presence, was something I was still learning to carry without being leveled by it. The Liam Crawford Brain Cancer Research Foundation had been formally established in March, registered as a 501c3 nonprofit under California law. $4 million transferred from the Living Trust on the day the foundation received its IRS determination letter. Dr. Patricia Warren, Director of Neuro-Oncology Research at UC Davis, called me the week before the inaugural symposium. 14 patients enrolled in the new protocol, 6 showing significant tumor reduction. One patient, a 31-year-old school teacher from Stockton, had returned to work full-time after being given 4 months to live. "Your son's foundation is funding the work that is going to change this diagnosis," she said. "Not for everyone immediately, but for some people soon." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, looking out at the lake. "That's exactly what he would have wanted," I said. Toby had come with me to the symposium that morning. 7th grade now, taller, quieter, in the way children get when they have carried something real without dropping it. On the drive back somewhere between Sacramento and Colfax, he said, "Do you think the medicine would have helped Liam?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Maybe not in time for him," I said. "But that's partly why he did what he did, so it would be in time for someone." Toby looked out at the foothills darkening in the afternoon light. "That's a good reason," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is." After dinner, he did his homework at the kitchen table while I washed up. At 8 o'clock, his mother came. Toby stopped at the front door. "Same time Saturday," he said. We had been fishing every Saturday morning since July in a 14-foot aluminum boat with a tackle box that smelled powerfully of the 1970s. "Same time Saturday," I said. I watched his mother's taillights disappear through the pines. Then I went to the home office, sat down at the desk, and opened the laptop. A document was on the screen, 3 sentences I had written the previous Saturday and not deleted. I read them. Then I looked out through the west-facing window at the last of the November light going out across the lake, the water turning from silver to gray to the deep blue of early dark. Eleanor had told Liam I had a whole world inside me. Liam had built me a door. I put my hands on the keyboard. I never thought I would write this story I typed, but my son left me a house in the mountains and a desk facing west. And some things can only be said when you finally have the right place to say them. Outside, the first stars appeared above the ridgeline. The pines stood black against the sky, patient and unchanged. I kept writing. Looking back, I understand now what I could not see then. This family story did not begin with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. It began with a father who loved too quietly, who assumed that presence meant safety, who confused familiarity with trust. Do not be like me. Do not wait until family betrayal strips everything away before you look carefully at the people sitting at your table. Liam saw what I missed. He paid a price no son should ever have to pay. And yet, I believe God placed that boy in my life not only to be my son, but to be my teacher. That is the only way I can carry it. This family story changed me in ways I am still discovering. My personal belief is simple: love is not enough without discernment. Kindness without wisdom is a door left open, and family betrayal, when it comes, does not announce itself. It arrives with a thermos of soup and a gentle smile and all the time in the world. This family story belongs to anyone who has ever trusted the wrong person inside their own home. If something in these words reached you, leave a comment below. I read everyone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I am grateful more than words allow. One final note. Some stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely to explore the deeper truths we all carry. If that is not the journey for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you better. But if you are staying, I will see you in the next one.